So apparently there's just one therapist in all of New York City and everyone's just going to her. Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Daredevil Born Again. This one, episode 7, Art for Art's Sake. So this ultimately ended up being a really interesting episode for me because at the start of the episode I was very much not feeling this one and was really kind of expecting to ending up not liking the episode generally. But as the episode went along, I found myself ending up liking it a hell of a lot more, mainly because of the thing that has been continually working this entire series, and that is the two things that need to be working the most, Matt and the Kingpin. Everything to do with both Matt's arc and the Kingpin's arc this episode was absolutely perfect. I have been really enjoying both of their sort of mirroring arcs of, Kingpin becoming more of the Kingpin and falling back more into his old patterns, even as he is the mayor and very clearly showing that fascist strongman style kind of gang mentality leader that he always displayed, but now in the mayor role sort of is a mirror to sort of the Trump mentality, even though I will still continue to argue that Kingpin is much more competent than Trump is. At least he's not inviting anyone to the group chat on accident. I know that wasn't Trump specifically, but it's part and parcel with that whole vibe, but also in how that mirrors Matt's sort of descent into becoming Daredevil. And I really liked that we got this episode, Matt kind of fully investing. Like, he is 100% down to be the Daredevil again and just fully going in. And I really bought that. Like, it feels like it's a good culmination of Matt's arc this entire season. I like him sort of going full bore, because if I recall, and it's been a little while, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember in season 3 when Matt became the Daredevil again at the end of season 3, because that kind of has a similar arc of Matt sort of resisting becoming the Daredevil. He kind of goes more like full bloodlusty into it and just kind of goes blinded with rage and pulls himself back at the last moment. Whereas here, it seems much more calculated and purposeful of like a choice of like, yeah, I feel like I'm living again. We kind of get that at the top of the episode where Matt is having sex in the shower. That old, like, I don't want to ask have you asking me any undue questions, my girlfriend. So we're just going to have sex. But it comes across as like, yeah, he's caught up in the adrenaline of it. But it's not as sort of like a rage. It's more of a just, yeah, I feel good, I feel alive, this is me sort of vibe to it that I think is allowing this to be a little bit more distinct from season 3, even though they both have very similar sort of arcs for Matt becoming the Daredevil again. So I enjoyed that for him going on in this, and there's a lot of really great moments with that that we see throughout here. Obviously, I mentioned the sex bit with Heather, and we have the moment where he's talking to Angela to try and figure out more about what Muse's plan was or what Muse was doing, and I like him being like, hey, if the cops don't do it, someone else will, obviously implying the Daredevil, just being full in on being the Daredevil again in a much more calculated way, even going up against Cherry and saying like, hey, you were the one coming to me when you were a cop, and now you can't do the same for me. So I really enjoying that for him. However, the place where this episode falls down really in a very, very strong way, and it's kind of been a problem throughout this whole season, and this episode is one of the biggest epitomes of that to me, is that the characters around both the Kingpin and Matt are generally just not as strong and not as interesting and feel much more broad brushstrokesy in a way that just makes them feel like characterizations and tropes rather than full people. And so when the show tries to rely on having them elicit emotion from me in some way, I'm just kind of left bored. I think the one exception to that, well, actually two exceptions to that, is Vanessa, who's a character from the original show. I actually really like how Vanessa is played here. I'll talk about her in a second. But also, I'll briefly talk about him. Daniel, played by Gandolfini's son, James Gandolfini's son. I forget his first name, but he is really interesting as sort of being that idiot, kid who wants to work in politics, is sort of the young Republican type who, like, Kingpin just values his loyalty, but he's not very smart, but he's able to work his way up because he is loyal, even if he's kind of dumb. So I appreciating his performance and his stuff here, where he's sort of like able to get it to the top by like blackmailing BB and things like that. And we'll see how that plays out next episode. I'm really enjoying. Everyone else, though, does not work, and I think the biggest example of that this episode for me is Heather. We have that after the sex shower scene, we have her sort of confronting Matt and saying, like, you're not acting like yourself, you're clearly pushing down trauma, kind of doing armchair, well, she's I guess it's kind of armchair psychoanalyzing him. She's a therapist, so I guess she can do that to a degree, and she's around him more. But the episode kind of tries to make me buy that they have this really long-term relationship, that she's able to read him really well. Like, she knows the difference between him being the Daredevil and not being the Daredevil, even though she doesn't know that he's the Daredevil. Like, she can tell there's a difference going on, and I'm not against that inherently, as like she's picking up on the different vibes from him. And obviously, there's been a bunch of time gone on since the beginning of the season when they first met, but the show has not spent enough time with us getting to know her relationship with Matt. We've got little bits and spurts of it, but I haven't really fully invested on them as a couple. So when the show tries to get me to buy that she would have this like really strong read on him, and it feels too familiar. It feels like she knows him too well for what we've seen. And even by the end of the scene, she says, "I love you, Matt," and it's clearly trying to set us up for us feeling bad when she gets attacked later on, and Matt sort of being willing to go to the mat for her. It's really trying to build up the relationship to that point of like Matt being fully invested, but the show hasn't really put in that work, and so the scene kind of comes across a little bit hollow and just trying too hard to not only earn the later emotion, but even in this scene kind of comes across as her being too familiar with Matt in a way that I not to say that it couldn't be that way given how much time was sort of implied to have gone on in the background, months presumably, but from what we've seen, I just don't buy the relationship, and so she comes across more as a characterization. And that doubly applies for when she starts doing her therapy sessions with Muse. And this kind of goes to the small world syndrome. Like, of course, she's dating Matt, she's the psychiatrist of Muse, and the Kingpin all at the same time, which is just like, that doesn't feel realistic. I mean, I allow a little bit of coincidence in some shows, I don't mind it, but that's just a real big one, that all three characters are connected to her in some way. And that Muse apparently has a huge incel-y boy crush on her, that sort of like he wants to like make her his masterwork of art. It comes out of nowhere. It doesn't do anything, and it feels like a real waste of Muse. I do like that she's the one that kills Muse, and Muse gets like tossed aside really quickly. And I think that's a fun play on this. Like, all right, Muse is done, and he's going to be a sort of a bigger thing for the Kingpin to sort of take credit for Daredevil's actions and saying like, look, I'm the strong mayor. But so I like that sort of like, ooh, look, you just getting rid of him. But he just wasn't that interesting of a character, and I feel like there was a lot more you could have done with him. And instead, he just played as like just a kind of real incel character in a very over the top coincidence that he just happens to fall for Heather, the person that Daredevil and the Kingpin both have a kind of connection to, even though the Kingpin connection doesn't come into real strong play here. So yeah, it just feels like you didn't even need her to be Kingpin's therapist. You just could have had her be someone else, and it would have honestly worked much better for me if she had just been someone else's marriage counselor. That would have been a much stronger way to play this, and then I might have bought it a little bit more. But even then, it would have been a big coincidence that Muse was also like overly invested in her in some way, but at least it would have been a little less of a problem. But here it just does not work. And then also Heather, speaking of that like sort of very character tropey sort of thing with her, she's honestly comes across as one of the worst therapists ever when she starts yelling at Muse about like, only cowards wear masks. I'm like, girl, the guy's got you tied up. You don't want to try and like ingratiate yourself with him in any way to try and prevent him from trying to murder you. Try any type of empathy. You're a therapist. It feels like she would be better than that. And then maybe instead of just start calling him a coward, it just felt very dumb. It felt very dumb on multiple levels, and especially for a therapist to have made that choice. And so it just really, her writing just does not come across very well to me. But moving back into more positives, I did really enjoy, and this is one of the things the show has gotten really well done, in how the Kingpin tries to play off that he cares about the city, but really he just cares about himself. So there's the opening sequence where he learns that Daredevil's back, and he's clearly pissed off that Matt's become Daredevil again, specifically because he has a vendetta. He doesn't like him. He is pissed off that Daredevil messed up his plans in prior seasons, but he tries to play it off as like, well, he beat up workers and he ruined an economic place for this, like an economic center for the city. But he doesn't actually give a shit about any of that. He only cares because Daredevil is someone that he personally has a grudge against. And it kind of goes into that, again, that sort of Trumpian strongman mentality of like, he tries to play off like, I really care about America, I really care about the common man, but really it's all just his own, ego and self-centrism, and it's all just bullshit to do what he wants. He wants to be the law. He doesn't want to respect the law. He doesn't respect the city. He doesn't respect America. He just wants to be the one that gets to get away with whatever the fuck he wants because he has the power. And so, yeah, it very much like and that has been something that the show has consistently gotten right from episode 1 of this season, of just showcasing this sort of strong man, yet not emotionally mature sort of characterization of someone like the Kingpin or a fascist type like that. So I do appreciate that. And I also, again, I mentioned earlier, Vanessa. I like Vanessa, like the Luca guy. Her sort of hearing from Luca's like, you believe this is bullshit too, and her sort of standing by her husband publicly in front, or at least in front of Luca, but you can tell that he can kind of get a read on her. And I like that the end of the episode sort of leaves it a little bit ambiguous. I think the implication is that she sent Luca to kill Kingpin and fully intended him to kill her husband so that she could be in charge again. That was her choice to do that. And Buck was just happened to be there, and Kingpin sort of expected that to be the case. That was what he thought was going to happen. But there's a little bit of ambiguity there where it could be like maybe she intended Luca to get killed there. She sent him to oust him so that that her Kingpin would kill him for it. It's like not clearly stated. We'll clearly learn at the beginning of next episode which for sure. I think the implication is more that she intended her husband to be killed there so she could take power again. And the other question is, how much did Kingpin know that she was going to betray him? How much was it part of his plan to get her to betray him? Who knows? This will all come out over the next episode or 2, I'm sure. But it's sort of a fun little ambiguity to play with at the end of this episode. Really like, all right, how do we read these moments? So I enjoyed that, and having a little bit of a week of speculation to sort of deal with that, but sort of getting more different advances next week, but in a way that's like, ooh, interesting reads on their motivation. A few other like bits and pieces here. I do really like that the Muse is actually sort of discovered based on actual good police work. Not that I'm a big fan of the police generally, but it's not the thin dark line as to make it very subtle, that this sort of task force that Kingpin put together, who in fact have done fuck all and just take credit at the end of the episode as Kingpin sets them up to. But it was actual like regular police work and Daredevil actually figuring things out too that sort of led people to Muse, and not any of the things that Kingpin or his task force did, even though they take credit for it. So I enjoyed that, though I do like that even the cop, the one girl cop that we see talking to, that we've seen a few times throughout the series, and when she's talking to Kingpin and sort of laying out like how they found out who Muse is, this kid, she also says something along the lines of like, oh, well, we're in the innocent till proven guilty business. Like I would have thought that we'd kill this Taekwondo instructor as a kid, but we're in the innocent till proven guilty business. And I liked that little line because it's played off. She plays it off as like, ugh, I'm annoyed by it, which still shows the idea that even though she's like, she's not one of the bad apples, she's not part of the task force or whatever, she still has that cop mentality that's pervasive across the cops within the system, whether they be the more aggressive ones or not. She still has this sort of like, ugh, I just want to find the guilty party. Like they view everyone as guilty until proven innocent. That sort of very cop mentality of viewing everyone as threats from the beginning, rather than as just citizens that they're meant to protect. Because theoretically, the job of a police officer is to just protect citizens, but obviously that's not how it always plays out. Usually it's there to enforce the state power. It's usually where cops are used nowadays. So I at least really liked that we still get the sense of the cop mentality, the problem with the cop mentality, even outside of the more designated bad apple cops that we get with the task force. So enjoyed that. Yeah, on the whole, I feel like I've talked myself into liking this episode more than I initially came into this, but I still feel like outside of a couple other characters here and there, but for the most part, outside of Kingpin and Matt, the show does not land as well for me. So when it focuses on those two, I really do like it, but when it focuses on other characters, does not land as well for me. Oh, one other thing that I will mention too, just kind of in that vein, there's that stuff with Cherry that I mentioned. And again, that's another one of those things where like the show is banking on me investing in Matt and Cherry's relationship. So when it kind of deteriorates, we're supposed to feel something. I don't know enough about Cherry. I know he's been around. I know we've seen him a bunch, but I haven't gotten enough of like his and Matt's bond or camaraderie or whatever outside of just like use case scenarios, like of Matt asking him to do stuff and things like that. Like it's not strong enough a relationship as it would have been with like Karen or, anyone else on the original Daredevil series for it to land is hard for me. So it just doesn't work as much. It's sort of a smaller problem than the Heather problem. Like Heather's a bigger example of that, but still there. Anyways, outside of Matt and Kingpin, not vibing with the show as strong on this stuff. However, when it does work, it works, especially when focusing on those two characters. So, I liked this episode, but there's still some very, very strong problems that are just indicative of the larger problems of the show. But that's my thoughts on this episode of Daredevil Born Again. What did you think? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, my friends, I hope you live long and prosper.